seems to me that several people in the questions that they have raised out here have a fundamental disagreement with me and with the Bible. When the Bible says that God is all-powerful, that does not mean that God can make square circles. When the Bible says that God is all good and all-powerful, that does not mean that God can make a free human being that will always choose to do good. God has created reality, and God is consistent with reality. Now, God performs miracles, but all a miracle is a changing of a natural law. But God does not dabble in making square circles. God does not dabble in making a rock that is so big that he can't lift it. God doesn't dabble in those kind of illogical word games. So no, God does not create a human being with a free will that can only do what God dictates. When God creates a human being with a free will, he has obviously partially limited his power by entrusting you and me with a free will, which means you and I can freely choose to obey God, or you and I can freely choose to disobey God. And God doesn't make us do either. I am trying to rip apart the smoke screen that people put between themselves and Christ.
In my afterlife, I'll worry about that later. This life right now, I'll worry about right now.
I can't put my trust in something that was written 2,000 years ago.
And a bunch of us are running away from God, are running away from Christ as fast as we can.
You must save yourself. No one will do it for you.
Maybe what you believe or I believe is the misinterpretation.
Don't take it from me. Go to the source document, the Gospels, and read about Jesus for yourself. If you genuinely want to know Christ, he's not going to play hide and seek with you. You'll find him.
You're saying that if you had a great teacher all semester, who at the end told you that they didn't get a 90 on
Yes.
the test, you'd be expelled. Now, I agree with you that one of the, and maybe the likely choice is to say that he's a manipulator. There's something wrong with this guy.
Right.
But isn't it also possible that he's telling you this not because he wants to manipulate you, but because he honestly believes this? Even though it may not be true, is it possible that he's merely deluded and thinks?
Yes.
Now, I'm not even saying I necessarily think that about Jesus, but isn't that at least a possibility?
Yes, sir.
He thought he was the Son of God, but he wasn't.
Correct. It's possible that Jesus was deluded.
So what I'm saying is that I think that saying that he wasn't the Son of God does not necessarily state that one can't think he's a good teacher. I think it's possible for him to be both. If you were saying that he said that he thought he was a good teacher, and you said, well, basically, you can't think he's going to be a teacher because you don't think he was right about being the Son of God because he must have been lying.
All right.
I think there is another option. He could be a good teacher of morality who thought he was the Son of God and wasn't. I don't think that changes the value of what he taught.
Right. But it definitely is a statement about him. It's definitely a statement that Jesus was deluded.
I'm just saying, but can we not still respect what he taught?
Well, sure. You can respect his teaching, but when it comes to himself, he was deluded. He was deluded in probably one of the most important areas of life, knowing who you are. I mean, if I run around claiming to be God in human form, you'll probably try and send me to a psychiatrist because you'll probably be concerned about, if you're a friend of mine, about my mental balance.
Right, but it could also be that at the same time, you are a paragon example of what morality should be, even if it's for the wrong reason. You could be both, in which case I could say, okay, maybe for his own interests, this guy is in trouble.
Right.
But in terms of providing an example for us, he's incredibly valuable.
Right.
Because for whatever reason, he lives the ultimate example of a moral life.
Too bad. So maybe Jesus was the most classic example of a split personality. Totally deluded regarding his identity, but incredibly gifted as a moral teacher. But here's why I have a problem with it. A person who is deluded usually is not capable of carrying on the quality of relationships that Jesus carried on. I mean, there was a tremendous transparency in his relationships, a tremendous vulnerability, a tremendous honesty, a refusal to play games, a brutal honesty with hypocrisy, where he nails hypocrisy. Secondly, study Jesus' analysis of the human dilemma, and it's amazingly on target. He points out that our real problem is not lack of education. Our real problem is a twistedness at the core, a selfishness, a pride. Well, go over your own life, go over your family's life. And it's incredible how accurate his analysis of the human dilemma is. So in light of the depth of his relationships, and in light of the piercing analysis of the human dilemma that Christ gives, to conclude that he was deluded, fairly hard to maintain. A person who is deluded does not have those kind of abilities to build relationships, to so piercingly and searingly honestly analyze the human dilemma. Jesus in the Bible insists that all the good gifts that you enjoy today, laughing at a party, building friendships with your buds, those are all gifts from God. Your central nervous system that enables you to experience pleasure, it's a wonderful gift from God. In hell, because you are separated from the giver of those good gifts, totally separated, you will not be able to enjoy any of those gifts. Those gifts will not be there for you to enjoy. Second point, Jesus warns that you and I have chosen to do evil at times. Not all the time, but at times. Because of the evil that we have chosen to do, we must be punished. So Jesus spoke about hell in some of the most horrible human language imaginable, but he did not give us a photograph. So I can't give you a photograph of hell. But I can warn you that you're right, sir. Jesus talked about hell in some of the most horrible human language imaginable. And to be very honest with you, sir, that is part of what motivates me to do something as stupid, as idiotic, as stand out on this quad at the University of Illinois, pleading with you guys, read the Gospels for yourself and put your faith in Christ, because you see the evidence points to him as being reliable. So that's part of what motivates me. I don't want you to go to hell.
I don't want to go to hell. I don't believe in it, so I'm not going to go to hell. But
if hell exists, it really doesn't matter whether you believe in it or not. You're going to go there if it exists. If it doesn't exist, you're right. You won't go there.
so I don't believe it exists.
Yeah, but you see, our believing something doesn't make it true or false, right? If I believe the earth is flat, that doesn't make the earth flat. Reality exists separate from my belief. So if there is no hell, we got nothing to worry about. But if there is a hell, then we got lots to worry about.
But if you didn't believe what you believe, you wouldn't be out here talking about it.
Correct?
And to you, that would make it not true.
No.
Yes.
If I believe that God does not exist, that doesn't put God out of existence.
For me, it does. How is that possible?
If I don't believe that this guy exists, that does not change the fact he exists. No, we're not. We're talking about reality. If in reality God exists, the fact that I'm atheist doesn't change the fact that God exists.
It's on a different plane, Cliff. You just said that yesterday. He exists outside of our existence.
Fine. So if he exists outside of time and space, then he really exists. If he doesn't really exist outside of time and space, then he doesn't really
But
exist.
don't compare him to me saying that this guy doesn't exist. Because it's
I am
two separate
attacking
things.
your view of reality. What I heard coming from you is, my view of reality is, if I believe it exists, then it exists. I could not disagree more strongly. My belief does not determine reality. If I believe that the earth is square, that doesn't make the earth square. In reality, the earth is round. If I believe that there is no God, but in reality there is a God, my being an atheist doesn't change the reality of his existence. Right? Just because I don't hear a tree fall in the woods doesn't mean the tree doesn't fall, right? Just because I wasn't around to see Napoleon fight the Battle of Waterloo does not mean that in reality Napoleon didn't fight the Battle of Waterloo. Just because I wasn't around to see you grow up doesn't mean you didn't have a mom and a dad and grow up in a home. My belief does not determine that which is real. The challenge for me as a thinking human being is to get in touch with what's real. If you flunk an exam, you don't take the paper up to the professor and say, time out. This is my reality. The professor will look you in the face and say, sir, your reality is incorrect. You flunk. That's called life, guys. If you have sex with someone who has HIV and you contract HIV and you look the doctor in the face and say, no, sir, I don't believe I have HIV. That does not change reality, which is you got HIV. If you believe you're Superman, that doesn't make you Superman. If you're a accidental collocation of atoms, if you're simply a good-looking monkey evolved to a higher order, then you can tell me that you have value. But in reality, you don't have value. You're a cosmic accident. So if you believe you're a cosmic accident, then live it out. Which means, I don't have any innate value and dignity. I'm a cosmic accident.
You don't study it with a microscope, you study it with your mind.
Fine, but you cannot use
I never said
the scientific process
yes, you can.
to pinpoint love, what love is.
If you have a value that you hold dearly, intelligence, and I meet another person who shares that value, that goal, I respect and admire and love that person for what I see in them. That's a scientific, logical thing. If they lose that thing which I love, I take my love from them. So it is a broad, logical, rational view. You analyze what
science.
you believe, and you look for it in other people.
Science is based on the repeatability of a material experiment. That's hard science.
That value I give my love to.
You can't scientifically pinpoint love, justice.
You can't scientifically pinpoint an electron either.
By that argument. So what?
So, but they're there, and we have proven their existence, and we study them logically and rationally, but we can never pinpoint them. We can never study them with a microscope.
Right?
It's the same principle. You can study love just as you can study other.
No, there's not an electron called love.
I didn't say there was. I'm making an analogy, not a direct relation.
Well, obviously, I disagree with your analogy. Obviously, we're arguing that electrons have a physical property, and we're arguing that love does not have a physical property.
That
doesn't mean it can't be studied.
Energy doesn't have physical property.
You cannot scientifically study love.
Why not?
Because it has no physical property to it that you can experiment with, that you can analyze. It is beyond observing, physically, materially. You can't do it.
If you can't observe it, then how can you experience it? You experience love. You can measure it. You can say, well, you can quantify love. You can study love. You can observe love.
Oh, really? What is it?
I don't know what it is, but I can
then how can you observe it?
And I can develop. I can make observations of it based on scientific methods. Like, do I love that person? You know, did I fall in love with this guy sitting here? No. Okay. Then that's different from, you know, when I fall in love with this girl, you know? It's quantifiable that way. You can study it this way.
Of course you can study it, but it's not a scientific study.
It doesn't have to manifest itself in existence. You don't have to be able to hold on to it. But if you're aware that it exists, you can study it.
You can study it. Of course you can study it. But you don't use material experiments to study it.
No, you don't use material experiments. But you can still study it.
Sure, you can study it.
It's a scientific process.
You can study God as well.
I can't study God. I don't believe it exists.
Well, just because you don't believe love exists doesn't change it from existing. And just because you don't believe God exists doesn't change him from existing.
But if you can't... Just because you believe God exists doesn't mean he exists either.
Correct.
But presumably you don't believe he exists because you can't find any evidence to study him with. So I think that's a valid point.
And I think the overwhelming evidence is that God does exist. The order and design of the cosmos, life coming from life, not from non-life, Moral absolutes, love. Clearly points to reality being more than matter and energy. There's got to be some type of spiritual being who creates us and gives us these abilities, these values that are intangible, that you cannot put in the bottom of a test tube or under a microscope, but that are very real. And you're right, you can think about them and study them.
Just because we don't understand the complexity of life, though, doesn't mean that it couldn't spring from random happenstance or whatever you would describe that.
Yes, but if you say there is no God and you limit all of reality to matter and energy, then if all of reality is matter and energy, you do not have the possibility for love as a free choice. Because everything that you and I do is biochemically determined. So that means
be biochemically determined. Just because we don't understand how that process works doesn't mean that love doesn't exist.
And quantum mechanics tells us that nothing is actually determined.
There could be the supernatural. Just because we can't explain why it would exist, just because we can't explain why God would exist or how God would be manifested, doesn't mean He exists or doesn't exist. I mean, you got to go on your faith, I'll go on mine. But according to scientific evidence, He doesn't prove God one way or another.
The question is, what does the evidence point to? Is it more plausible to believe that order and design come from chance, or is it more plausible to believe that order and design come from an intelligent mind? Is it more plausible to believe life comes from life, or is it more plausible to believe life comes from non-life? Guys, for me, those are simple. Life comes from life. Never does life come from non-life. But an atheist is someone who says, I believe life comes from non-life.
Where did God come from?
He is eternal. He has no beginning. He doesn't come from anywhere.
Kind of a paradox.
No. It's just the same as my naturalist atheistic friends who say the universe is eternal. They're choosing to believe matter and energy are eternal. I'm saying, you can't have life coming from non-life. It's far more reasonable for me to believe in the beginning life, in the beginning God, than it is for me to believe in the beginning matter and energy. You never get life coming from non-life.
Why not?
What do you define life as?
Well, would you please give me an example of when life comes from non-life? When does the animate come from the inanimate? I can't think of one example.
If God has the keys to the kingdom, so to speak, why would He need us to do anything at all if, A, He loves us, B, knows that according to the world, at least as you understand it, most of us are headed, the majority of us here are headed to a lake of fire, myself included. I'll be the one with the red flag. But at the same time, C, He can change the rules however He wants because He does happen to be God, and He can say, maybe there doesn't need to be a hell after all, or maybe it should be, there's no lake of fire, but maybe you're just stuck watching Mission Impossible reruns or something like that. Why, if knowing that the system is set up the way you've described, but also that because God is in charge of it and is infinite and can set up the system however He wants, how come He then, at least in your worldview, says, except of course that I'll be shoveling most of these people into hell because of the rules that I have set up? And this is how I show my love for mankind, by dooming most of them to hell.
My argument is simple. The all-powerful God chose to partially limit His power by creating you and me free. Because you and I are free, we are responsible for the decisions that we make. And if we choose to live our lives separate from God, He is not going to force us against our choice to spend eternity with Him in heaven. Instead, respecting our individuality, respecting our free will, He will honor our decision to live our lives separate from Him, and we will spend eternity separate from Him. If, on the other hand, we choose to live our lives together with Him, then He will honor that decision, and we will spend eternity together with Him in heaven. You make your own bed, and you lie in it. I make my own bed, and I lie in it. The all-powerful God has chosen to partially limit His power by giving you and me a free will. Because you are free, you are responsible. Now, I'm going to repeat that a few times because I know how antithetical that is to what you're taught in philosophy class today. Because you are free, you are responsible. Because Adolf Hitler and the Nazis were free, They are responsible for Dachau and Auschwitz. Because I am free, I am responsible if I date rape. Because I am free, I am responsible for my racist attitudes. Because I am free, I am responsible for cheating on my IRS 1040 form. Because I am free, I am responsible for getting drunk, getting in my car, crossing the median, and slamming into her car, sending her to an early death. Because God chose to create us free, He put the mantle of responsibility on our shoulders. For me to blame my environment, for me to blame my genetic makeup, is a cop-out. Although I am influenced by my environment, obviously, although I am influenced by my genetic makeup, obviously, there is still a me, a soul, a person, an individual who is responsible for what I do. Yes, sir.
Well, following up on your analogy of the tax code, you talk about the idea of hell and damnation and so forth if you don't follow X, Y, and Z, as though the tax code were some received object which God cannot alter. Here's my question. Again, if God is an infinite being, He takes a look at person X and says, okay, here's someone who was really not that bad. You know, he wasn't Hitler, he wasn't, you know, so he had a little problem with fornication, okay, but he wasn't a Christian, but at least, by golly, he was free. And I, as God, take so much satisfaction from the freedom that this man has that it doesn't bother me that I'm roasting his ass in eternity for all in hell. So we've got a God who says, freedom is so valuable that it doesn't matter to me that the vast majority of people here are going up in eternal smoke. Now, if God is not only just, but also loves us as you imply, then don't you think He could find a way, since He is the guy who wrote the tax code, the holy tax code in the first place, don't you think He could come up with a better system than that doesn't involve smoking you, and you?
The heart of sin is not fornicating. The heart of sin is not getting drunk. The heart of sin is not me cheating on my 1040 IRS form. The heart of sin is, God, I don't want you to be God. I want to be God. God, I don't want you to write the rules. I want to write the rules. Moral relativism is the quickest way I know to deify my own opinion. There is very little difference between Adolf Hitler and me. Hitler just took my hatred and spilled it out in a more profound way. Hitler just took my subtle racist attitudes and spilled them out in a more profound, deeper way. My lust, my subtle racist attitudes are basically a statement. God, I don't like the way you created me to live my life. I want to live my life my way, which includes subtle racist attitudes, lust, greed, pride, and arrogance. It is that heart attitude, God, stay away, that condemns me to hell. It condemns Hitler to hell. Now, the amazing good news of Jesus Christ is God loves all of us so much that He sent His only Son, Jesus, to bleed and die on a cross to forgive us and to give us eternal life. That is incredible news. That's absurd, that God would love this little rebel so much that He would offer me forgiveness.
Well, I'm thinking of the historical case of, you've mentioned Hitler a couple of times. It seems that there was some sort of famous Jewish scientist who had national or international reputation in the 40s, and the Nazis knew that if we sent this guy up the smokestack, that there would be a lot of international bad press. So they said, you know, we'll give you a chance to emigrate. We can sneak you out the back door. We're going to toast everybody else in your town, but we'll sneak you out the back door. And this man said, no, I'm going to stay with my people. He stayed in actually the Warsaw Ghetto, and was put on the trains with all of his other folks, with all the other folks in the Warsaw Ghetto, and did go to probably Auschwitz and up the chimney, because he chose as a moral act to stay with his people and to use what power he had and what kindness he had to try to help out their lot for as long as possible. Now, here's a man who made an enormous sacrifice, literally gave up his life in order to try to in some way ameliorate the pain of his people. Now, you're saying that that's Act 1, and in Act 2, God says, big deal. I don't care what you did, you fool. You wasted your time. Man, silly person trying to make life happy for people. Back to hell you go. Darn. Is it what you're talking about, moral relativism? Does that mean that God is perfectly justified to say to this person who could have walked out free and gone to Canada or whatever, and instead decided to stay with his people and help them and use what power he had for them? You're saying that God says, well, that just really doesn't matter, and to argue that this guy maybe doesn't deserve to burn eternally in hell after going up in the ovens is somehow moral relativism.
The claim of Jesus is simple. If I choose to live my life separate from God, I can still do a lot of good things, but if I choose to live my life separate from God, regardless of how many good things I do, God is not going to force me against my will to spend eternity with him in heaven. Hell is separation from God. If that's what I want in this life, that's what I will get for eternity.
Are you saying that nothing but preaching the gospel is God's work?
If this man was... could you possibly conclude that that is what I said? How, in your wildest imagination, could you possibly conclude that?
Well, I'm an English major.
Then explain to me how you possibly rationally came to the conclusion that I'm communicating out here, the only work that is worth anything is preaching the gospel.
Because you have just said it doesn't seem to bother your scheme at all that a man has literally given up his life to try to feed the poor, to try to help the sick, because they were poor Jews and they were sick Jews, and he was a Jew, and therefore all God says, you know, God has this one admission exam that says, do you want to come into heaven? Am I a Christian? Yes, no. Guy says no, pulls the switch, down into the furnace, and that's it. Now, all of these things that this guy was doing, as far as feeding the sick, helping the sick, feeding the hungry, all of that stuff seems to me like that would be a pretty good definition of God's work, and according to your system, it means zilch nada. That's why I draw the conclusion that apparently the only work that you value or believe that God values is the spreading of the gospel.
Well, then you didn't listen carefully to what I said. I called the work that Jewish scientist did good. I said atheists can do good. Agnostics can do good. All people do good at some point in their life. But we also all sin. And in our sinning, we display an attitude. And that attitude is, God, I have a better way of running my life than your way. And if I insist on that, I'm insisting, God, remove yourself from my life. I will live my life my way. And on the day of judgment, God will honor my request. He will remove himself from my life for eternity because I want him out. G.K. Chesterton, the great English author, wrote, hell is God's great compliment to the reality of human freedom and the dignity of human choice. C.S. Lewis, who taught at Oxford and Cambridge, points out very, very well that if I choose to live my life my way, God will let me live my life my way for eternity, separate from him. It's that simple. It's not a statement that an atheist doesn't do good deeds. Many atheists do wonderful deeds. Many agnostics do wonderful deeds. And that's great. They have value in themselves. Every good deed has value in itself. But when it comes to living your life together with God, if you don't want to live together with God, God is not going to force you against your will to spend eternity with him in heaven. It's that simple.
Why do people suffer? Why do so many million people die in a war? Like, why should God take us through suffering if he can do anything?
Okay, good question. Ultimately, I do not know why God allowed evil and suffering. For thousands of years, philosophers and theologians have struggled with that question. They've never come up with an ultimate answer, and I'm not going to be able to ultimately answer you.
Because it's incompatible.
No, it's not incompatible.
Yes, it is.
It is totally possible that an all-powerful God would choose to partially limit his power by creating us free. Once God gives us freedom, he opens the door that we will abuse the legitimate gifts that he has given us and use those legitimate gifts in an illegitimate way.
And then he would allow us to suffer, and therefore he would not be all loving.
All loving does not mean I am going to protect you from the consequences of your decision.
Okay, but
It does not
innocent
mean that.
people also die. Not only bad people die.
That is
That's right.
People kill people.
And they are not suffering from what they have done, but from what other people have done.
That's correct.
And if God was all powerful, he should not allow that.
Unless God has chosen to limit his power by creating us free, by creating a world where there is cause and effect, which means your responsible decisions have ripple effects that are very positive and good, but your irresponsible decisions have negative ripple effects that hurt and scar people.
But if those effects hurt other people that are innocent, then God is not all loving.
Yes, he is. But he has chosen to create a world peopled with individuals who have a free will, and the decisions that they make don't simply affect themselves, they affect others. Obviously, you as a student here at the University of Illinois are the beneficiary of a lot of work and sacrifice in putting this place together. Responsible decisions were made, the ripple effects you enjoy. Every student here enjoys.
You're diverging from the issue, sir.
No, I am not. It is equally true that people make irresponsible decisions, and there are consequences, ripple effects, that go down through the generations.
And God, if he was all powerful, could decide for it not to happen.
Probably.
Good, I'm glad you said he could. But obviously, he has chosen to put an incredible mantle of responsibility on the shoulders of human beings. There are real consequences to your decisions in life, to my decisions in life. You can use your fine education from the University of Illinois to find a more sophisticated way to murder people, or you can use your fine education to find a cure for cancer. You don't have to do either. But your amazing gift of creativity positions you to do incredible evil or incredible good.